Hey, this is Pastor Dave, and this is your Monday Mojo. Hope you had a great weekend. Mr. Irrelevant was beaten by Mr. Relevant. Anyway, Chiefs, champs. So on Saturday, I had the great privilege of officiating at the funeral of my Uncle Ted. My Uncle Ted was a United Methodist pastor, United Methodist district superintendent, United Methodist home director. And when I came into the conference 30 years ago, if I said, you might know my uncle, Ted Murphy, oh my gosh, everybody knew Ted Murphy because of the kind of service and life that he lived. He served everywhere he went. He understood that the secret of this life, to living a great life, like Jesus said, is if you want to live a great life, be the servant of all. And so when I was meeting with the family and the funeral home director, they were talking about his obituary. And they were talking about how they were going to have to put a shorter one in the Indianapolis local newspaper because it is so costly to pay for a long obituary in the paper. And they could put a longer one in the paper in Franklin, but in the Indianapolis paper, they had to put a shorter one because it was just going to be so cost prohibitive to do so. Now, that got me thinking, because about 2-3 months ago, I did a funeral for a gentleman who had the same kind of thing. 1,000-word obituary. And it got me thinking, that's the kind of life you want to live. The kind of life that's going to cost your family a lot to put your obituary in the local big newspaper. And that's not why you do it. And that's not why Uncle Ted did it. But he served. He served the police department and the chaplaincy of the fire department, and he served the town council of Franklin, and he served every church that he went to with all of his heart. And so people remember him from years and years. He's been serving in the United Methodist Church for 3/4 of a century. That's just an amazing story. And one of the pastors said, Ted utterly flunked at retirement because he just kept on serving. And so his story is just lengthy. And I'm sure they didn't include everything in it. But even one thing more. His story plays out in the life of his kids, who knew they were loved and knew how to love. And then they had kids who knew they were loved and knew how to love. And they had kids, so there were family, there were kids, there were grandchildren, and there were great-grandchildren. And the great-grandchildren wanted to be helping out with the coffin as he was carried to his resting place. You see, that's the kind of story that you can't print. That's the kind of story that plays out and keeps on playing out in the stories of his lives and their kids and his grandkids and their great-grandkids. And it's a story of a man who lived a life well and served. And you couldn't pay enough to print that whole story in any paper, but it's playing out in this life. So thanks, Uncle Ted, for the example of how to live a life well. Anyway, that's your Monday Mojo. Have a great week.